Okay, June, you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Good evening and welcome. I'm June Baer, Chair of the Tell and Celebrations Committee. Thank you for joining us for this Zoom presentation of Voices of 1775, showing how that fateful April day affected not only the men who fought on both sides, but also their wives and mothers and those who supported the crown. This program is generously supported by the Cary Library Foundation. First, a few technical details before we begin. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the Cary Library's YouTube channel. Let me introduce Christine Muir, and she's the community librarian, and Cary Library is hosting this seminar, and Christine is here to provide all the technical assistance we need to make this program run smoothly. This is a webinar, so everyone will be muted until Jim Hollister and Paul O'Shaughnessy finish their talk. During the Q&A session, if you have a question, click on the Q&A box and type your question. If you would like to speak, click on the raise hand icon. Linda Dixon, a member of the Celebrations Committee, will work with Christine to handle your questions. And Christine may place some helpful messages from time to time in the chat box. We are now ready to begin our program. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Jim Hollister and Paul O'Shaughnessy. The lives of Lexingtonians and their neighbors changed forever on April 19th, 1775. Many wrote down their thoughts and feelings in the days following the battle. Others waited decades to share their memories in letters and journals. Jim Hollister, living history coordinator at Minuteman National Historic Park, captured some of these writings and assembled a team of Revolutionary War reenactors to portray these real-life characters in a video, Voices of 1775. In addition to serving as living history coordinator, Jim also oversees the education, historic weapons, digital media, and digital media programs for the park. Co-host Paul O'Shaughnessy is former commanding officer and current quartermaster of His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot, better known as the unit of British troops who confronted the Lexington Minutemen on Lexington Green. Paul and Jim will introduce a series of short videos setting the stage and offering insights and perspectives on the words of the characters. They hope for a stimulating discussion with the audience, so we welcome your questions at the end of the program. So please welcome Jim Hollister and Paul O'Shaughnessy.
Well, thank you very much.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. So what we're going to do, we have several accounts here. We get about 14 accounts. They're all very, very short. And I've got them grouped into 5 different groups. And we'll watch each group and we'll sort of discuss, some of our reflections about what we just saw. And these are real. These are real accounts of men and women who experienced these events firsthand. So it's not actors and actresses that are, ad-libbing. This is the actual words. So I found that there's just a lot of power in the actual words of the people who were there. And Paul, do you have anything to add?
And just echoing what you've said, it's one thing to read these from a page or to have somebody explain to you what happened those days in that day, but to hear the real words, the authentic accounts, and to hear the precision and the depth of detail that's being given to us and the different perspectives as we come up. The first one are simply accounts and perceptions of the battle. We have 2 American and 2 British views, and they sort of give you a 360 of what happened that day, and it's really quite evocative. And so I invite you all to just imagine in your heads as you listen to this what these scenes must have looked like and what these people on both sides actually went through that day.
Yeah, well said. And these first 2 groups are very military. And then by the 3rd group, we're getting into the impact, and we're going to be hearing from some of the women who experienced this on a whole different level. So why don't we get started with the first grouping of videos, and you'll probably recognize the first person. His name is somewhat well known. He's being shy.
There we go.
In the winter, towards the spring, we frequently took turns, 2 and 2, to watch the soldiers by patrolling the streets all night. The Saturday night preceding the 19th of April, the boats belonging to the transports were all launched and carried under the sterns of the men of war. We likewise found that the grenadiers and light infantry were all taken off duty. From these movements, we expected something serious was about to take place. On Tuesday evening, the 18th, it was observed that a number of soldiers were marching toward the bottom of the common. About 10 o'clock, Dr. Warren sent for me in great haste and begged that I would immediately set off for Lexington, where Messrs. Hancock and Adams were, and warned them. He also sent an express by land to Lexington, a Mr. William Dawes. Previously, I had agreed with Colonel Conant and some other gentlemen in Charlestown that if the British went out by water, we would show 2 lanterns in the North Church steeple, and if by land, as a signal, 1. I left Dr. Warren's, called upon a friend, and desired him to make the signals. 2 friends rowed me across the Charles River, a little to the eastward, where the Somerset man of war lay. They landed me in Charlestown, where I met Colonel Conant and several others. They said they had seen our signals. I set off upon a very good horse. It was then about 11 o'clock. After I'd passed Charlestown Neck and got nearly opposite where Mark was hung in chains, I saw 2 men on horseback under a tree. I discovered they were British officers, and they started after me. I turned my horse and galloped towards Charlestown Neck, and then pushed for the Medford Road and got clear of them. After I alarmed almost every house till I got to Lexington, I found Messrs. Hancock and Adams at the Reverend Mr. Clark's and told them my errand. After I had been there about a half an hour, Mr. Dawes came. We refreshed ourselves and set off for Concord. We were overtaken by a young Dr. Prescott, whom we found to be a high son of liberty. We agreed we had better alarm all the inhabitants till we got to Concord. We had got nearly halfway when I saw 2 British officers. I called for the doctor and Dawes to come up and said there were only 2, and we could have them in an instant. I was then surrounded by 4. The doctor jumped his horse over a low stone wall and got to Concord. I observed a wood at a small distance and made for that, but out started 6 officers and ordered me to dismount. One of them clapped a pistol to my head and told me he was going to ask me some questions, and if I did not give him true answers, he would blow my brains out. He then asked me if I was an express. I told him I was, and added that there would be 500 Americans there in a short time, for I had alarmed the country all the way up.
Sir, in obedience to your Excellency's commands, I marched on the evening of the 18th instant with the Corps of Grenadiers and Light Infantry for Concord to execute your Excellency's orders with respect to destroying all ammunition, artillery, tents, etc. collected there. Notwithstanding, we marched with the utmost expedition and secrecy. We found the country had intelligence of strong suspicion of our coming, and fired many signal guns and rung the alarm bells repeatedly. I think it proper to observe that when I had gone some miles on the march from Boston, I detached 6 light infantry companies to march with all expedition to seize the 2 bridges beyond Concord. On their arrival at Lexington, they found a green close to the road, a body of the country people drawn up in military order with arms and accoutrements, and, as appeared after, loaded. Our troops advanced towards them without any intention of injuring them, other than to inquire the reason their being thus assembled, and, if not satisfactory, to have secured their arms. But they in confusion went off, and one of them fired, and 3 or 4 more jumped over a wall and fired from behind it, on which the troops returned their fire and killed several of them. After this, we marched on to Concord without anything further happening. While at Concord, we saw vast numbers assembling in many parts. At one of the bridges they marched down, with a very considerable body on the light infantry posted there. On their coming close, one of our men fired on them, which they returned. An action ensued, and some few were killed and wounded. In this affair, it appears that after the bridge was quitted, they scalped and otherwise ill-treated 1 or 2 of our men, who were either killed or severely wounded. On our leaving Concord to return to Boston, they began to fire on us from behind walls, ditches, trees, etc. As we marched, the fire increased to a very great degree and continued without intermission for upwards of 18 miles. It must have been a preconcerted scheme in them to attack the king's troops. Otherwise, they could not, in so short of a time, have raised such a numerous body. Notwithstanding the enemy's numbers, they did not make one gallant attempt during so long an action, but kept under cover. I have the honor, sir, Francis Smith, Lieutenant Colonel, 10th Regiment of Foot.
On Captain Parsons joining us, we began our march towards Boston again from Concord. Immediately as we descended the hill into the road rebels began a brisk fire, but at so great a distance it was without effect. But when the grenadiers found them with shot, they returned their fire. Just about that time, I received a shot through my right elbow, which effectively disabled that arm. It then became a general firing upon us from all quarters, from behind hedges and walls. This continued till we arrived at Lexington, which is about 9 miles. We was then met by reinforcements of 4 battalions under Lord Percy, to our great joy. I got Mr. Syme, surgeon's mate, to examine my arm. He extracted the ball, it having gone through the bone and lodged within the skin. From a fatiguing march and loss of blood for 9 miles, and want of provisions, having not had a morsel since the day before, I began to grow rather faint. Seeing a soldier eating a little biscuit and beef, I begged to partake. He generously gave me half of what he had, which was about a mouthful each. At last we made it back to Boston, where a musician helped me to my lodgings. There I called for a dish of tea. The imagination may conceive, but the English language can hardly describe the satisfaction I derived from that tea, notwithstanding I was interrupted by 1,000 questions.
I was a member of Captain Davis's company of Minutemen, who was in the fight at Concord in 1775. We turned out to drill and exercise twice a week from the November preceding. The company was raised by voluntary enlistment. The town paid us 8 pence for every half day. I was alarmed on the 19th of April about daybreak. I gave notice
to several of the company and went to Captain Davis's house. His family were sick. He had 4 children, some had the canker rash and others were unwell. Captain Davis appeared to be heavy-hearted. One of the men used some light language and was reproached by Captain Davis. We set out for Concord when the sun was something more than an hour high. Other members of the company joined us on the road. We made some delay near Colonel Barrett's and then proceeded to the high ground north of the bridge. There was a considerable number of men from Concord and other towns assembled there, and others were fast joining them. Immediately after our arrival, the officers of the companies, including ours, went by themselves a few rods and held a consultation for a few moments. Captain Davis then came to the head of his company, drew his sword and said, "I haven't a man that is afraid to go," and gave the word, "March." We proceeded toward the bridge in double file. Major Buttrick and Colonel Robinson marched with Captain Davis. I should note that when we first arrived, Captain Davis took the left of the Concord Minutemen, and as he had done before, at the muster a few weeks prior. And he went from this position when he took the front as before stated. After we began to move, the British were beginning to take up the bridge. Major Buttrick called to them in a loud voice for them to stop. About the same time, they desisted and formed for action. I next saw a ball from the enemy strike in the river and heard the report of 2 others directly after, which we thought not to be aimed at us. A volley immediately followed, by which Luther Blanchard, our fifer, was slightly wounded. And hearing him cry out, Major Buttrick exclaimed, "Fire! For God's sake, fire!" The order was obeyed, and the British returned the fire and killed Captain Davis and Abner Hosmer, a private of his company, and wounded Ezekiel Davis, a brother of the captain, on the head. They then retreated toward the village. 2 of the British were killed there. 1 of them was left on the ground wounded, and in that situation was killed by an American with a hatchet. This act was met with universal disapprobation and was excused only by the excitement and the inexperience of the perpetrator.
Well, okay, so I think that just sort of touching on what we talked about earlier, imagine these scenes. I mean, we just heard an incredible account of the fight at the bridge and how they came down, and with precision and according to British accounts, essentially, this myth that these militiamen were just a rabble, a bunch of farmers who grabbed grandpa's gun off the mantle and ran telepathically, apparently, to wherever they needed to go. It is a myth. And what we're talking about, what we're hearing is 2 military forces. This is Colonel Smith's detachment of 700 or so light infantry and grenadiers going up against the Massachusetts Army. Be clear, nothing less than the Massachusetts Army. And it was organized and they knew what they were doing. And later in the day, one of the British officers, Earl Percy, says they have men amongst them who know very well what they are about. And the accounts from the British side echo this. I mean, it's really quite something. Imagine yourself as a British soldier or officer, basically stuck on this road, being peppered by these militia companies. It's quite remarkable.
No, and they knew, as Percy said, they knew what they were about, and they knew what was right to do for the situation. There's some interesting, with Solomon Smith, and in that last account. First of all, it just Ranger Jared gave that. He was the Solomon Smith the younger, and it took several takes to get him to be able to say disapprobation. It's not a word we use much very, very often these days. But first of all, it starts out with, that the company was raised by voluntary enlistment. They were paid, 8 shillings a week to turn out for drill. So they are very well organized. And when you look at the British accounts of the North Bridge fight, all of those accounts begin with, they marched down upon us, in a very military manner. They were drawn up with the greatest regularity. I mean, this is shocking to them. And it's also interesting with the accounts of the North Bridge fight, all the British are concerned with, they marched down upon us, because that to them was the aggressive act. They're not coming down to talk. They're not coming down to offer us a dish of tea. They're coming down, in a military formation. We're being attacked. And so we're going to defend our post as soldiers will. The colonial accounts, as you heard in Solomon Smith's, all basically to them, okay, yeah, they sort of gloss over the fact that they marched in an aggressive manner against the British position. But they're really concerned about who's pulled the trigger. So all of their accounts, even like, Solomon Smith's account written more than 50 years later, really get into that. They fired first. They fired 3 guns and then a volley, and only then did we return the fire. Very, very concerned about that. Again, this being the beginning of the war. But there's so much there. If we could talk about Paul Revere for a moment. So, of course, this was supposed to be a secret expedition. And what is clear from Paul Revere's account, this is not going to be a secret. And you hear that echoed in Francis Smith's, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith's account,
Right.
where it's like, it appears that they know we're coming, and as he says at the end, this must have been a plan, because otherwise they could never have mobilized so many people in so short a time. And the numbers.
And it was. Yeah.
What?
And it was.
Absolutely shocking. 4,000 colonial troops in the field engaged against the British by the end of the day. And there were about 20,000 that responded within a week to set up for a siege operation around Boston. So none of that happened by accident. But Paul Revere is talking about a network of spies. As he said, he organized some mechanics, or people that work with their hands, artisans, craftsmen, who are watching the British patrol, and they're noticing things, the boats being launched, grenadiers and light infantry being taken off duty. Something's coming in. So tensions are very, very high. He also, when he lands in Charlestown, we talk about the lanterns, one if by land and two if by sea. And we have this wonderful poem by Longfellow that has Paul Revere basically waiting to see the signals, but of course those were by Revere. And when he lands, the members of the Committee of Safety are all, he asks them, did you see my signals? Yep, we've already sent out riders. So it's already in motion. So yes, Paul Revere is instrumental, but again, the word is already getting out. It's already spreading. This was all planned.
He is only one of many, many riders out that night. And essentially what Smith is marching into as he heads out towards Lexington is the world's biggest bear trap. And he just doesn't know it until it closes. So it's really quite something.
Yeah.
By the way, just one quick thing, and then we should get back to the next videos, but there's this fascination about who fired first and all of that. And that echoes down through history about the conflict between Lexington and Concord about where the shot heard around the world is. So being from Lexington, I'll actually give up on that one. The first shot is in Lexington, no doubt, but the shot heard round the world, the moment that these militiamen take it in hand and seize the initiative from Colonel Smith and the British soldiers, is at the bridge, that volley that you just heard about.
Yes, and I can't believe you went there, Paul. Brave man.
I did.
Well, we can instead just deflect and talk about the controversy about Acton taking the post of honor. As you heard in Solomon Smith's, they went to the right of the line. That made a lot of people very angry that they did that. But it turns out the funny thing is, it's not very funny, but the only thing they really agreed on was that killing a soldier with a hatchet blow was a bad thing. It was met with universal disapprobation. And one more thing about Ensign Lister, want to just very briefly before we move on. His account, it's a long account. These are only little snippets, but you may have noticed that he asked a grenadier, an enlisted man, if he could have some food. Paul, you portray a British officer. How unusual is that?
It is unheard of. It tells you that the social barrier has been breached, and I think by the circumstances. And when you're under fire, I think everybody is now a soldier, and so it's really quite remarkable. And I'm sure the soldier would never have dreamed of saying, "Oh no, you can't have any." But that Lister basically asks, like this, it's really quite something, because the rigors of the social system at the time were reflected in the army. And just a note there, think about this. I mean, if I got shot in the right elbow up at Merriam's Corner, that's where you'd find me, by the side of the road, nursing my elbow. This guy goes 9 miles and finally gets the thing plucked out of his elbow by a surgeon's mate. These people are made of titanium by comparison.
Well,
this idea that they're effete British officers is simply not the case. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say he did admit to feeling a bit faint.
A bit faint. My God, a bit faint. Yikes. Yeah. Amazing.
All right, so why don't
All right, so shall we?
Yes, we'll move on to the next group. These are 2 colonial accounts of the same action at a place called Elmbrook Hill in Lincoln. For generations, this fight was known as Bloody Angle. We now call it Elmbrook Hill because there's no historical reference to it being called the Bloody Angle until the early 20th century. But anyway, it would have been known then as Elmbrook Hill. But this is the fight they're talking about, so two different accounts of that fight at Elmbrook Hill.
On the morning of the 19th of April, 1775, just at sunrise, alarm guns were fired, which were quickly followed by a post bringing news that the regulars, as they expressed it, had gone to Concord. I ran directly to Major Brooks, late governor, asked if he were going to Concord and when. Immediately was the answer. I borrowed accoutrements, and we set off together for Concord. The militia company of Reading marched on at the same time, under the command of Captain Batchelder. We rendezvoused near the middle of the town of Bedford, left horses, and marched forward in pursuit of the enemy. A little before we came to Merriam's Hill, we discovered the enemy's flank guard of about 80 or 100 men, who on their retreat from Concord kept that height of land, the main body in the road. The British troops and the Americans at that time were equally distant from Merriam's Corner. About 20 rods short of that place, the Americans made a halt. The British marched down the hill with a very slow but steady step, without music or a word being spoken that could be heard. Silence reigned on both sides. As soon as the British had gained the main road and passed a small bridge near that corner, they faced about suddenly and fired a volley of musketry upon us. They overshot, and no one, to my knowledge, was injured by the fire. The fire was immediately returned by the Americans, and 2 British soldiers fell dead at a little distance from each other in the road near the brook. The battle now began, and was carried on with little or no military discipline and order on the part of the Americans during the remainder of that day. Each one sought his own place and opportunity to attack and annoy the enemy from behind trees, rocks, fences, and buildings, as seemed most convenient. The enemy retreated and were followed. We saw at a distance a wood which appeared to lie on or near the road the enemy must pass. Many leaped over the wall and made for that wood. We arrived just in time to meet the enemy. There was then on the opposite side of the road a young growth of wood well filled with Americans. The enemy was now completely between 2 fires, renewed and briskly kept up. They ordered out a flank guard on the left to dislodge the Americans from their posts behind the large trees, but they only became a better mark to be shot at. A short but sharp contest ensued, at which the enemy received more deadly injury than at any one place from Concord to Charlestown. 8 or more of their number were killed on the spot, and no doubt many wounded.
Okay. I've taken the liberty of answering a few questions on Q&A, just the text thing. So I'm not sure if that's visible to everyone, but just while we were doing that.
My apologies. I stopped that video too soon because I was also answering something in chat. Would you like me to let the video finish playing?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I apologize for that, but I will do that now. Thank you.
The wonders of technology.
From Cambridge. He informed us that the regulars were upon the move for Concord. We mustered as fast as possible, and the town turned out extraordinary. We proceeded toward Lexington. When I was nigh Jacob Reed's, I heard a great firing. We soon heard that the regulars had fired upon Lexington people and killed a large number of them. When we came to Lexington, we saw about 8 or 10 dead and numbers wounded. We then proceeded to Concord by way of Lincoln Meeting House, ascended the hill and refreshed ourselves a little. The people under my command and also some others came running off the east end of the hill while I was at a house, and we proceeded down the road. We could see behind us the regulars following. We came to Tanner Brook at Lincoln Bridge and then concluded to scatter and make use of trees and walls for to defend us and attack them. We did so and pursued on flanking them till we came to Lexington. Mr. Daniel Thompson was killed
and others. I had several good shots. The enemy marched very fast and left many dead and wounded and a few tired. So Edmond Foster was the first one. So he was a volunteer from the town of Reading. And he was a young man at the time. He was a student of divinity at Yale. So he was home on spring leave when the war broke out. So he, they got the alarm and he went to his neighbors and he got his accoutrements and off he went. And the other is Loami Baldwin, who was an officer, a major in Colonel Green's regiment. And he led about 180 men into the fight. And he came through Lexington. So they're coming from different directions, but they're all hearing about what's going on, through alarm riders and various sources. But here, Baldwin's men, they see what happened in Lexington firsthand. The shocking, they've killed our countrymen. There was another officer that marched with him who mentioned that, at that point, the men were just furious about what had happened and what the regulars had done. So that, of course, presents a big challenge to the officers. You've got to sort of take that anger and you've got to prevent these people from running off and doing something potentially silly. Paul, do you have anything on these accounts? You're muted.
I am muted. There we are. I'm no longer muted. Just a couple of things. One is touching on that anger. Remember, this is the outbreak of a civil war. It's all well and good for us to talk about Americans and British and everything like that. That's rather language that's employed later. These people all know each other. This is our army turning on us, and it's really quite something. And it's an amazing day. The second is Loami Baldwin. Now, if somebody has to get taken to the cleaners and lose to someone, Loami Baldwin is your man. I mean, the man goes on to he commands a devastating ambush that day. He goes on in later life to engineer the Middlesex Canal, create apples, the Baldwin apple, things of that nature. I mean, amazing people. Lastly, the accounts of Tanner Brook, the Lincoln Bridge, some of the stone walls. That's the section of the road that sort of doglegs around and is now preserved in the national park. And the road still dips down just before you get to the split that goes over to Route 2, and that wasn't there at the time, of course. But you can still imagine and see actually a lot of these exact stone walls and preserved or from the original day. I mean, the property lines and the roadway are exactly where they were. So you can really, really get a sense of the terrain. We tend to whiz by in cars these days, but I would invite all of you to get out, park the thing, and walk. And now you really, really see, I see how this worked. And it's really quite something.
Yeah, and where Baldwin placed his men, so the road had to come down off of the east end of Brooks Hill, and then at its low point, it crossed Tanner Brook, and then starts to rise into the upland. So you do have a natural choke point right there where they've got to pull in their flankers, and they've got to go across that bridge. Where Baldwin placed his men just at the top of the hill beyond the bridge, long musket range, but certainly within there, you could do damage. So probably about 150, 200 yards. At the top, there was a stone wall and an orchard. So they've got cover, they have concealment. They also control that road. And one of the accounts, British account, Lieutenant William Sutherland, said, on our ascending the height to the road, they gave us a very heavy fire. So it's really a perfect location. So, these folks kind of know what they're doing to set that ambush up. And the British have no choice but to just push through. As he said, they marched very fast and left many dead and wounded and a few tired. Foster's account's interesting. And you can stand today pretty much where he was, and you can look across that pasture that wood pasture. So as he says it after the fight at Miriam's Corner, we saw a wood at a distance, which appeared to lie on or near the road the enemy must pass. So the rest of the landscape is open. It's all farmland. It's not the woods, but this one particular area was wooded. So they run across the fields and they get into position. And he says, on the opposite side, there was a young growth of wood well filled with Americans. He's looking at Baldwin, or the Woburn men probably flanking as they're going up that the road to the northeast. But one of the things he talks about, the British, they come out. He said, they only became a better mark to be shot at. So they ordered a flank guard out. My very first year as a black powder safety officer with the Park Service, and I was with Paul, and I wanted to get into the action, and I knew that the light infantry would be in it. And I just remember going out into that field during our tactical demonstration, which of course I know is, it's safe and nobody's going to get hurt, and that's my job. But going out there and then looking at that stone wall where the militia would have been, and of course during this reenactment, seeing it bristling with gun barrels, you realize, oh my God, if this were the real thing, as Foster said, only a better mark to be shot at. These soldiers went out there probably knowing that it was going to be a one-way ticket. Mm-hmm. And why did they do it? Probably one, they were ordered, but also they're making a sacrifice of themselves so that maybe their comrades can make it back.
Yes.
And as Foster said, about 8 or more were killed in that area. So really, really devastating part of the battlefield.
Yeah, and as you go up and down the battle road and the preserved sections of it, look to your left and your right and realize that the British sent out these flankers, they were known as, these companies, and where we find the musket balls and where we find the evidence of a battle, it's very often 50 to 100 feet to the left or the right of the road. That's where some of this very heavy and nasty fighting is occurring. And the intent of that on the British side is to protect the people in the column and keep the militiamen at a distance. And it's effective, but it's devastating on the people that have to do it.
Yes. And since you brought it up, we'll give an ARPA warning here, American Antiquities. Anyway, don't go looking for musket balls in the national park.
Right, I'll come find you.
Yeah, that will get you arrested very, very quickly. But if you do pluck a musket ball out of the ground, we've lost the context, so it's now worthless. So so don't do that. So thanks, Paul, for bringing that up. Paul, ready to move on to the next group? Paul?
Yep, all set.
All right, let's go.
Let's do it.
On the 19th day of April, 1775 in the forenoon, the town of Concord, wherein I dwell, was beset by an army of regulars who in a hostile manner entered the town and stopped in formation before the door of the house where I live. About 50 or 60 of them was in and out the house, calling for water and what they wanted for about 3 hours. At the same time, all our near neighbors, in the greatest consternation, were drawn off to places far from the thickest part of the town where I live, and had taken with them their families and what of their best belongings they could carry. Your petitioner, being left to the mercy of 600 or 700 armed men, and myself 71 years old and very infirm, it may easily be imagined what a sad condition I was in. Under these circumstances, I committed myself to the divine protection and was very remarkably helped with so much fortitude of mind as to wait on them with water or what we had, and chairs for Major Pitcairn and 4 or 5 more officers who sat at the door viewing their men. At length, I had by degrees cultivated so much favor as to talk a little with them, when all of a sudden they had set fire to the great gun carriages just by the house. And while they were in flames, I saw smoke arise out of the townhouse higher than the ridge of the house. Then I did put my life, as it were, in my hands and ventured to beg of the officers to send some of their men to put out the fire. But they took no notice, only sneered. Seeing the townhouse on fire, I did yet venture to expostulate with the officers just by me as I stood with a pail of water in my hand, begging of them to send, etc., when they only said, "Oh, Mother, we won't do you any harm. Don't be concerned, Mother," and such like talk. The house still burning, and knowing that all of the row of 4 or 5 houses, as well as the schoolhouse, was in certain danger, I yet ventured to put as much strength to my arguments as an unfortunate widow could think of. At last, by one pail of water after another, they sent and did extinguish the fire.
I, Hannah Leighton of Acton, testify that Isaac Davis, who was killed in the Concord fight in 1775, was my husband. He was then 30 years of age. We had 4 children. The alarm was given early in the morning, and my husband lost no time in making ready to go to Concord with his company. A considerable number of them came to the house and made their cartridges there. The sun was from 1 to 2 hours high when they left for Concord. My husband said little that morning. He seemed serious and thoughtful, but never seemed to hesitate as to the course of his duty. As he led the company from the house, he turned himself round and seemed to have something to say. He only said, "Take good care of the children," and was soon out of sight. In the afternoon, he was brought home a corpse. He was placed in my bedroom until the funeral. His countenance was pleasant and seemed but little altered. The bodies of Abner Hosmer, one of the company, and of James Hayward, one of the militia company, who was killed in Lexington in the afternoon, were brought by their friends to the house, and the funeral of all 3 was attended together.
The news reached us about 9 o'clock in the morning. The East Company in Needham met at my house as part of the military stores were deposited with me. They there supplied themselves, and by 10 o'clock all marched for the place of action with as much spirit and resolution as the most zealous friends of the cause could have wished for. We could easily trace the march of the troops from the smoke which arose over them, and could hear from my house the report of the cannon and the platoons fired by the British. The Needham Company was soon on the ground, but unhappily, being ignorant of what are called flank guards, they inserted themselves between them and the main body of the British troops, in consequence of which they suffered more severely than their neighbors who kept to a greater distance. In the evening, we had intelligence that several of the Needham inhabitants were among the slain, and the next morning it was confirmed that 5 had fallen in the action, and several others had been wounded. It is remarkable that the 5 who fell, all of them had families, and several of them very numerous families, so that there were about 40 widows and fatherless children made in consequence of their deaths. I visited these families immediately, and with a sympathetic sense of their affliction, I gave to some the first intelligence they had of the dreadful event, the death of a husband and of a parent. The very different manner in which the tidings were received discovered very different disposition of the sufferers. While some were almost frantic in their grief, Others received the news with profound silence, as if in a consternation of grief they were incapable of shedding tears or uttering sighs or groans. I shall only add further with respect to the memorable day that appeared to have a surprising effect on the spirit of the people in general. They became at once ferocious and cruel, at least towards all of those they suspected as unfriendly to the cause. Their treatment of such as the British left dead on the road was such as I could have supposed. They were stripped for the sake of their clothes and left naked on the highway until buried by order of our government.
The men hitched the oxen to the cart and went down below the house and gathered up the dead. As they returned with the team and the dead soldiers, my thoughts went out for the wives, parents, and children away across the Atlantic who would never again see their loved ones. And I left the house, and taking my little children by the hand, I followed the rude hearse to the grave hastily made in the burial ground. I remember how cruel it seemed to put them into one large trench without any coffins.
So, Paul, do you want to start?
No, you go ahead.
Well, first of all, I will mention that Martha Moulton, the petitioner and the old woman who was in Concord, did get her pension that she was applying for. I think it was a lump sum of £3 for her services of basically preventing the town from burning. But you know, her petition, of course, you get the sense of shock, of horror, you know, and beset by an army of regulars. You know, it was terrifying for anybody who had to experience it. But then the next couple, Hannah Davis Leighton and Samuel West. Hannah's account, of course, she loses her husband, Isaac Davis, who was killed at the North Bridge fight. And we see a rare moment where husband and wife are separating for the last time. And accounts of Isaac Davis that morning from some members of his company written years later, so that he was, in fact, very heavy-hearted that morning. And she says this in her deposition decades later, saying that, you know, he said but little, you know, he seemed to have something to say, but only said, take good care of the children. But she does seem to receive it with a little bit of stoicism. You know, they were brought to the house, they were laid out, you know, in the bedroom, they seemed but little altered. But in Samuel West's account, you get, this is a people, they don't really write about their emotions. But Reverend West did talk about their reactions. You know, some are frantic in their grief and others just silent, just stunned. You know, you've just received this heavy blow, the worst possible news. And you see the different reactions. It really kind of humanizes the story. Paul?
Yeah, it does. And, you know, this is the cost of these things. I mean, they're not lightly entered into. You know, both sides, but essentially, you know, this is the beginning of a war for the future of this continent. You know, it's as it turns out, and I don't think anyone was necessarily had that in mind at that day, but it's very serious business. That image of the stripped bodies lying in the road until somebody orders that they really should be buried is rather remarkable. And I believe Mary Hartwell actually ensured that several of them would be buried properly and given a proper Christian burial. But it gives you a sense of the hard feelings. The other is we have a snippet of a military moment here again. Also, I believe was it the Needham company that got caught, and essentially you have to remember that we have this image of the British, that the British don't know what to do, and they're not well prepared for this. They actually do know what to do. They are very tough fighters. I mean, the fact that they actually got through this and survived is a remarkable thing. But they gave as good as they got in certain places, and that's an account of one of them, where some companies got caught with the flankers coming up behind them.
Right, because they were focusing on the column.
Yes, exactly. Right. And the light infantry, I mean, remember, I don't want to take away from the human accounts. That's what this was about. But all through this, keep in mind, the British Army are the bad boys of the 18th century. They are not to be trifled with. And you'll forgive them perhaps for thinking that this is just another rebellion to be put down. But the militia of Massachusetts had another think on that. So, but the British were no pushovers. And when we think of the British simply as these kind of automatons and dumb robots getting shot on the road, that actually undermines what the achievement of the Massachusetts militia on that day. It's really all very remarkable, no matter how whatever side you're looking at it from. It's quite something.
So why don't we go on to the next group? We're going to get people who did not support the rebellion. They were Americans.
Wonderful people.
Your kind of people. Yeah, let's hear from them.
Yeah.
On the 18th instant, at 11 at night, about 800 grenadiers and light infantry were ferried across the bay to Cambridge, from whence they marched to Concord, about 20 miles. The people in the country had a signal. It's supposed by a light from one of the steeples in town upon the troops embarking. The alarm spread through the country so that before daybreak, the people in general were in arms and on their march to Concord. About daybreak, a number of the people appeared before the troops near Lexington. They were called to disperse when they fired on the troops and ran off, upon which the light infantry pursued them and brought down about 15 of them. The troops went on to Concord and executed the business they were sent on, and on their return found 2 or 3 of their people lying in the agonies of death, scalped and their noses and ears cut off and eyes bored out, which exasperated the soldiers exceedingly. A prodigious number of people now occupying the hills, woods, and stone walls along the road. The light troops drove some parties from the hills, but all the road being enclosed with stone walls served as a cover to the rebels, from whence they fired on the troops. The troops returned to Charlestown about sunset after having marched near 50 miles. The next day, the country poured down its thousands, and at this time, from the entrance of Boston Neck at Roxbury, round by Cambridge to Charlestown, is surrounded by at least 20,000 men who are raising batteries on 3 or 4 different hills. We are now cut off from all communication with the country, and many people must soon perish with famine in this place. At present, a solemn, dead silence reigns in the streets. Numbers have packed up their effects and quitted the town. But General Gage has put a stop to any more removing, and there remains in town about 9,000 souls, most of which are subject to the crown.
Loving brothers and sisters, on the 19th of April, the engagement happened, and my husband was wounded and taken prisoner. I hear that they are treating him well, and I am striving to get him, as he is in a very dangerous condition. But it is almost impossible to get out of Boston, or in, or to get anything. We are forced to live on salt provisions entirely. My husband is now lying in one of their hospitals at a place called Cambridge, and there are now 40 of 50,000 of the rebels gathered together. We are not 4,000 at most. It is very troublesome times, for we are expecting the town to be burnt down every day, and I believe we are sold out. I hear my husband's leg is broke, and my heart is broke.
To paint the scenes of distraction, violence, mobs, riots, and insurrections that have taken place throughout this country for the last 12 months is altogether beyond my ability. How much less then shall I be able to describe the horrors of war that have reigned here since the 19th of April? The people have been arming themselves, learning the military exercise and forming magazines for war during the course of last year, and have always been publishing to the world that they would fight and die for their liberties, as they express themselves. But few people believed they would fight, and I believe General Gage himself never thought they would carry it so far. But on the 18th of April, the general, having previous information that they had formed their grand magazine at a place called Concord, about 20 miles from Boston, dispatched 500 troops with the greatest secrecy at 10 o'clock at night to go and destroy that magazine. The troops no sooner got over the ferry than alarms were spread throughout the country by firing of cannon, ringing of bells, and post riders. All this was planned before that time. A list of the killed and wounded has never been published here, but by best account, about 70 were killed and about 200 wounded and 30 missing. How many of the rebels were killed and wounded is impossible to say. They published a list, but this and all other publications respecting their cause are the most gross falsehoods. Their leaders always take care to suppress the truth. But, dear brother, it is impossible to describe the surprise, amazement, and consternation that prevailed in town that day. Word was brought in every half hour that the troops would all be cut off, and almost every inhabitant was wishing and praying that it might be so. It was expected that the whole country would rise and make an attempt to enter the town, which was not very strongly fortified at that time. It was likewise supposed the inhabitants within, who all had arms in their possession, would rise and attempt to kill the soldiers and the few friends to good government that were in it. However, the night passed away, and no attempt was made from without, nor insurrection within. The rebels, to the amount of 20,000, assembled in a few days, and stopped all the passages and communications from the country to Boston, by this intending to starve us. Notwithstanding, we have no supplies from the country, we are far from being in a state of famine. We live all on salt meat, except a few fish that comes in the harbor now and then, and the prices are not so much raised as might be expected.
Well, I'll start off for this one. There's a myth that Loyalists, first of all, we tend not to hear from them very much in accounts. They're the other guys. And there's a myth that they were just fatuous admirers of the king and everything the king or parliament did. And I think that when you scratch the surface a bit, you find out first they're human beings. The second is that they're Americans, and many of them, these are American loyalists. And many of them, even for example, Governor Hutchinson of Massachusetts is a patriot for his colony, for the American cause. He even goes to London on his own dime to argue for the American cause, but he will not cross the Rubicon of descending into rebellion. That's where these people draw the line. And they look to rational government. They see chaos. They see a descent into anarchy. They see mob rule. They see all of the evils that are associated with that. And so one can sympathize with their thoughts, their attitudes, and their loyalties. The British, the great tragedy of the American Revolution. It's a wonderful thing in the long run, but at the time, the irony, perhaps is a better word to say rather than tragedy, the irony of it is that these are the two most democratic liberal societies on the face of the earth, tearing each other up over the nature of liberty. The rest of the world is run by kings, despots, and dictators. It is only here and only in the British polity that there are these debates about liberty to such a degree. I often tell people that if John Hancock and Samuel Adams had pulled their shenanigans in Paris, we wouldn't even know their names. They would have just been taken out back and shot. So there's a great deal to be said. And these concepts of liberty are British concepts. And there's a great deal of sympathy in London at this time for the Americans. So it's not the black and white that everybody, many people seem to think. It's very nuanced, and you're seeing a little of that here.
Definitely. And I was also struck by, well, first of all, in Boston, what you have is this burgeoning humanitarian crisis. There
Yes.
are people, loyalists and patriots, wherever we want to classify them, that are trapped in that town. And they're expecting basically death and destruction at any moment.
Mhm.
And you hear that in Anne Hulton,
Yes.
and of course in The Wife of the British Soldier. And that's the thing, a British army, when it deploys, they bring their families with them.
Yes.
So it's this whole community of people are trapped in this horrible situation. And also with the loyalist whose name is unknown, the mistrust their media they lie. They're, they're just making stuff up. They're suppressing the truth. These two sides are just not even agreeing on what truth is. Just incredible mistrust, incredible bitterness that preceded the outbreak of war.
Yeah.
So
welcome to Civil War. Yeah.
Yeah, Civil War. So we have one more, just one more account, not one more group. A very extraordinary one, Lemuel Haynes from Granville, Massachusetts, who was a man of mixed race. He was Black and he was part white as well. Ended up becoming a minister after the war. And he wrote a poem about his thoughts on the Revolution. So listen very carefully to the words.
The 19th day of April last, we ever shall retain, as monumental of the past, most bloody shocking scene. At Lexington they did appear, arrayed in hostile form, and though our friends were peaceful there, yet on them fell the storm. 8 most unhappy victims fell into the arms of death, unpitied by those tribes of hell who cursed them with their breath. The savage band still march along, for Concord they were bound, while oaths and curses from their tongue accent with hellish sound. To prosecute their failed desire, at Concord they unite. 2 sons of freedom there expire by their tyrannic spite. The awful conflict now begun to rage with furious pride, and blood and great infusion run from many a wounded side. For liberty each freeman strives, as it's a gift of God, and for it willing yield their lives and seal it with their blood. Thrice happy they who thus resign into the peaceful grave, much better there in death confined than a surviving slave. This motto may adorn their tombs, let tyrants come in view. We rather seek these silent rooms than live as slaves to you.
What can you say? Wow.
A really amazing sort of summation of the American cause, but there's another cause in there. As many Black men and women living in Massachusetts were enslaved at the time, and they saw this revolution as like, okay, finally, we're talking the same language. You don't want to be slaves? Hey, we don't want to be slaves either. And they actually write petitions and asking to be heard. And there was actually, I was reading in the Journal of the Provincial Congress, there was a petition put forward by a Mr. Wheeler asking like, well, maybe we ought to consider this. And it was written at the bottom of the page. And I was like, oh, I turned the page and says, and the committee decided to take no action. Well, of course, it was going to have to wait. But, many African Americans served on both sides of the war. Some served the crown, some served the patriot cause, all with that one goal in mind of not being property. And there was one young man who lived in Lincoln, the home of William Smith, named Cato. He was enslaved. He joined the army. He died in service. His name is all but forgotten until a local historian, Don Hafner, started doing more research about him. It's changing how we tell that story. But just the impactful words of Lemuel Haynes, we'd rather seek these silent rooms, meaning the tomb, than live as slaves to you. And again, it's right between the eyes. You can't read that and not know exactly what he's talking about. So it's sort of like a dual cause.
Yes. He speaks and then he speaks.
Right.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And I think it's appropriate to point out that, yes, the another irony of this war is that it is fought for freedom and liberty, which is at the same time being denied to these folks that are enslaved. And there was slavery here in Massachusetts. We evolved up and out of it pretty quickly after independence was declared, within a couple of decades, maybe just one, I think. But it happened and it was really here. So we have to acknowledge that. It's yeah, it's just it's a lovely poem, and there are so many that one really captures it so well. It's great.
So why don't we do some questions?
Yes, I admit I answered a few questions. I was a bad boy. I answered a few questions by text that were on the Q&A. So if at some point, if you want to repeat those, I don't know if those showed up, but I remember at least two of them, so I can certainly.
We'll repeat them.
And
so it's going to be my pleasure to be the facilitator, if you will. Hi, everybody. I'm Linda Dixon with the Town Celebrations Committee, and it's going to be my pleasant task to throw some questions at these gentlemen. First, I want to tell you how handsome you both look in your period uniforms. Thank you very much for dressing up for us tonight. Paul, we certainly know who you are. You're Colonel Francis Smith, and you're the bad guys on Patriots Day.
I like to think the good guys, but okay.
Well, definitely. I mean, I'm a bit of an Anglophile, and I do think that the Brits don't really get a fair shake on Patriots Day. But we know every year at the reenactment, how many troops do you bring onto the green?
Well, in the reenactment, we bring about, I would say, about 100, which is actually approximately correct. There were 700-ish that came out that night.
Yeah.
But what happens is, as Colonel Smith, as that group is coming up through Arlington, what is now Arlington, Menotomy, and into East Lexington, they can hear the gunshots and the bells and all that. He turns to Major Pitcairn and he says, take 6 companies, your best marchers, which would be the light infantry, and head to Concord and grab those 2 bridges beyond the town, South and North Bridge. So it's that group of about 100 men that actually runs into the Lexington militia on the green. And the rest of them are still maybe a mile perhaps behind them.
Well, I have to tell you, when those 100 incredible looking grenadiers come onto the green in their bright red uniforms, their tall hats, and then when they fix their bayonets, even though I've seen it dozens of times, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And I think, I don't know how the Minutemen stand their ground at that point. I don't know how they stay there. But anyway, that's another sign of how brave they were. But in the meantime, Jim, you've been a reenactor, I know, for several different units. Can you tell us what your uniform signifies and what different units you have reenacted with?
Well, these are civilian clothes, so I'm dressed as a farmer.
You're dressed as a farmer?
Yep. Like probably an upper middle class farmer, but a farmer nonetheless. I mean, farmers were landowners. We usually, when we think of farmers, we think of somebody covered in mud and hay and, wearing a big linen smock over everything and a straw hat. And certainly there was a time for that when they would, if they're working out in the field. But, nowadays, if you think about it, if you're going to go to the grocery store, t-shirt and jeans, fine, who cares? But back then when you went out in public, you wanted to not necessarily dress up to the nines, but you want to look respectable. Militia duty was public. All your neighbors are going to see you, this sort of interconnected community. You owe money to all of your neighbors. They owe you money. Say you show up and your coat is patched up and threadbare and so, something's not going too well in the Hollister household, but I should probably call in my debts. So you want to look respectable. You want to represent your household well. So, it's just a broadcloth coat, silk neckcloth. That was actually very common. They're getting them imported from Great Britain. Black wool felt hat. So nothing too fancy, but again, this was pretty common dress. If I were a gentleman, you might see some lace, things like that. So this is probably the most common that I'll do, portraying a militia officer or a militia soldier. I've also portrayed a British officer on rare occasion of the 59th Regiment, which nobody does. The reason why it's not portrayed in living history is you notice Paul's coat that he's wearing. It's red with like a rich yellow collar and facings. The 59th have the red coat, and their facing colors are a particular shade of purple called pompadour. It's ugly. Well, it's a lovely shade, but if you couple it with the red, it's not that good. And it's really hard to get. So I made this one uniform and I'm like, okay, that's it. But I'll bring that out if I'm playing with Paul and his folks when they come to the park and I don't want to stand out. So I kind of want to blend in and be a British officer. So I'll do that as well.
And you're always welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a blast playing with the Brits.
And as a reminder, folks, if anyone would like to ask a question, you click on the Q&A tab and type in your question. If you'd like to speak, say anything in person or make a comment, then click on the raise hand icon, okay? Now, it turns out that the stories about the scalping and the hatchet chopping of the British soldiers really struck a nerve with several of our audience members. I'm going to combine several of their questions, okay? Mary Hutton says, I think they basically want to know, did it really happen? Mary says, was the killing by an American with a hatchet, was that the scalping that was referred to by the soldiers? And Tom Crutcher says, were the 3 British soldiers being mutilated that the Loyalist woman talked about, were they the ones at the Concord Bridge? And then Suzanne Caton, who perhaps is a little bit jaded about this, says, how likely is it that the colonists scalped some British soldiers at Concord?
Okay, I can give that a shot, and then I'll if that's okay with you, Jim.
Yeah.
And then they all refer, I believe, to the same incident. And the mechanics of it are that there is this fight at the bridge. There are at least 2, there's number wounded, but there are 2 men killed or very badly wounded left at the bridge. I think that's correct, Jim. Is that?
Yeah.
But what people don't perhaps, and then you're like, well, how would the British even know about what happened to them? What is going on at the same time is that several companies have gone further into the countryside, have crossed the bridge and gone further out to the Barrett farmhouse, which is about 2 miles to the west of North Bridge, which of course adds about 4 miles to the day that those men had. They hear the shooting from a distance when they're out there, and they probably say, that's not good, we better get back. And they're heading back to the bridge. And as they approach, heading east, coming back towards the bridge, they can see the bodies. And there's a very sick moment there for them when they realize, something, and everybody's gone. Something bad has happened. And it is as they march over the bridge, coming back to the Concord side, that they witness this body that has had its head beaten in a bit with what turns out to have been a hatchet. They didn't realize what it was, but it looked all the world to be like a scalping. And I think these stories got embellished. The noses and the ears and all that may be embellishments. What appears to have happened is that there was a member of, and Jim helped me out here, the Acton company, I think?
No, one of the Concord companies.
Concord company, thank you. Who he wasn't quite right and acknowledged about, and he had a hatchet. One of these guys, for all we know, he twitched or he moved or something, startled him, and he hit him with the hatchet in the head. Whether he was already dead, I don't know. We don't really have that detail, but it was it had 2 effects. One was there was this approbation against that amongst the revulsion amongst the militiamen who witnessed this, but also these soldiers saw the results of it on their way back, and that spread through the ranks. You can only imagine how quickly that one, when you have 30 guys coming back, 30 or 60 or so men coming back, and they start to tell about this when they join the rest. So that story went with like wildfire, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a game of telephone. I mean, it keeps getting more fantastic in the telling. And
Right.
it also, with the wounded, the British wounded are desperately trying to stay with the column, hanging on to, horses' saddles or anything, carriages, to not be left behind, because the rumor was that the Americans were mutilating the wounded.
Yeah.
So it really was that one incident. But, these are now enemies, and they are very prone to believing the worst of their enemies.
Mhm.
And that incident actually got mentioned. General Gage mentioned it in his official report that he sent back to London.
Yes.
So that one Minuteman, Ammy White, who whatever his motivation was, anger, adrenaline, that one incident literally crossed the ocean.
Yeah.
And led to many other shocking scenes of violence and brutality.
It didn't help.
No.
Let's just put it that.
Guess not.
Right.
Thank you. Now here's a question about the initial encounter on the Lexington Green from Michelle Kane. Was it indeed Colonel Smith who stopped the conflict at the Lexington Common by commanding the formation through a drummer to reform? Why do you suppose Pitcairn didn't do this?
Sorry to jump in. I'll give a quickie here. Right.
You're the obvious person.
Right. I think there is a failure of leadership from Pitcairn. He loses control of his column. He isn't. One of the problems with the column that day is that there's a bit of a mishmash of officers. Everybody wants to get out of town. This is, well, boy, we're gonna show them. We're gonna, finally, after being cooped up in Boston with these people throwing sewage at us and everything like that, we're finally going to show them who's right and what's going on here. And so there's just officers galore out that day, and that tends to, and also you also have a lot of officers in command of units that they haven't necessarily commanded before. And I think in Pitcairn's case, that's a bit of what's going on. So we don't know every detail, but it would appear that Pitcairn literally loses control of these men, and he's unable to get them back. And it is Smith that comes on the green, maybe, I'm guessing 10, 15, 20 minutes later, sees the mayhem. I don't think he's pleased, because Pitcairn and his men are supposed to be seizing bridges, not chasing Minutemen or militiamen. And it is with this drum, one of the drummers, he probably brought drummers with him, and he used that to when they heard the drum, was like, uh-oh, Papa's back. Okay, time to get back in ranks and stop this. And so that's generally correct what happened.
Yeah, it's a clear and unmistakable signal. Pitcairn is screaming and waving his sword in the din. You can't necessarily hear what's going on. Also, to keep in mind is yes, there are mixed companies drawn from different regiments, not used to working together. So that's creating confusion. But these men were also scared, because as they're marching through the night, they can hear bells ringing, signal guns firing. Rumors that there's going to be 500 men waiting for him at Lexington, like Paul Revere had mentioned in his account.
Right. Paul Revere doesn't help when he tells them that.
No. And probably had no idea that might contribute to something. But, and a lot of them, this is going to be their first action. So, I mean, they're keyed up. I've talked with current serving officers in our military today who really that story resonates with them, because they deal with the same thing. You're leading a platoon of men into an area. There's high tension. There's fear. You've got to, as an officer, you've got to control that, because the results could be disastrous. And when they see what happened in Lexington, they're like, yep. And Pitcairn lost control.
Yeah. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah, it's generally correct.
Okay.
The account.
Experience won the day. Thank you, Smith.
All right, new topic. AJ Wyman says, we've heard a lot about Washington's spies in the New York area, for instance, the Culper spy ring. But we don't hear much about spies in Massachusetts or New England besides Paul Revere. in the Revolutionary War. Why is that?
Jim, I'll let you take a crack.
Sure. Well, both sides had spies. I mean, spying is a dirty business. General Gage sent 2 officers out into the countryside about a month before he sent the troops, Captain Brown and Ensign de Bernier. And they came out dressed in brown clothes and red handkerchiefs, so as to resemble the country people. They didn't fool anyone. They got sniffed out real fast, staying at a tavern just outside Boston.
I believe they brought their man with them.
Yeah, they brought a servant. And they said there was actually a black woman working at the tavern. One of them remarked to her, "Lovely country you have here." Well, okay, if you're a local, you're not going to say that. And she says, "Yes, it is. And we have very many brave men to defend it, which you'll find out if you go any further up." So that was sort of a check, please moment, and out they go. You know, but they went into Concord. Immediately people knew that they were spies. They went to the home of Daniel Bliss, a loyalist. They ran him out of his home, never came back. Real disaster. But the colonists, of course, they had moles, you know, they had people in Boston just watching, you know, like what Paul Revere said, just observing, looking for the signs. Somehow the word of the expedition leaked really quickly. I think it was Percy who talked about coming out of a meeting where he hears about, okay, we're going to be moving on Concord, comes out into the street and 2 guys were already talking about it. Right. So, I mean, this is really scary stuff. You know, and so the colonists had what was called the committees of correspondence. So they're all talking to each other. There's the committee of safety. They're looking for signals, the lanterns, watching the motions of the troops. So they're all communicating.
Okay.
And
then
John
there was
also had somebody in the provincial Congress,
right.
Benjamin Church.
Yes, exactly. A fine, upstanding young man.
Oh, yes.
So, right, both sides. This was probably the most, I mean, both sides were like Swiss cheese. I mean, there were holes everywhere. I think they both, I think they both knew exactly what each other were doing most of the time, it seems. I mean, in Gage's orders to Smith, he talks about a draft, a map, okay, of Concord, showing exactly where the cannons and the muskets and the musket balls and the flour are being stored. And, you know, so there's somebody up in Concord, and I think Benjamin Church has something to do with this, but there's somebody who's able to give Gage a detailed map of exactly where everything was. Now, by the time they get there, a lot of it's been moved, but that's remarkable.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. All right, we have a couple of people who have their hands up, which means they would like to speak, maybe make a comment, then ask a question. First one is Bill Poole. Bill, we are going to unmute you, so go right ahead, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Gentlemen, what a wonderful presentation. It's so great to see you. It's hard for us during the reenactment in those days to try to simulate the fear and the terror that was engendered by this incursion by the regulars and how fearful people were of the standing army and the British regulars. There's an example of a rider coming into Ware, New Hampshire, which is west of Concord, early in the morning of the following day. That would be the 20th. He did not know the result of what was going on, but he told them of the British coming out. The women and the children fled that town, fearing that the British were going to be there immediately. So how widespread that fear was on the part of all the communities around here. And you can imagine if they were terrified up in Ware, New Hampshire, how are the people around here? I know we try to do that, but it is an aspect of it. It's very hard for us to represent.
Yeah, the massive civilian evacuations.
Right, it's really quite remarkable. And that harkens back to, remember, British history, even recent British history of that era, is filled with rebellions, most of them unsuccessful in Scotland, Ireland, places like that, where people, whole villages, whole communities are burned out as punishment. It's severe, but it's effective. And so the British Army has this aura of being rather nasty. And I think a little of what happens in the early days of what becomes the American Revolution is that perception is punctured rather by the events of April 19th and then again at Bunker Hill, where they don't come off as invincible as they appear. And that's quite a wake-up call.
Yeah, and there was also this flight from the coast. I mean, the British Navy has a very strong presence in Boston. We don't have any Navy. So they have free reign to go up and down the coast. And so there's all sorts of panics, anytime somebody, thought they sighted a British ship, coming in, people are fleeing their homes. So yeah, I mean, just the absolute panic spreading, and people are, women are gathering things from the household, gathering the children, again, in a very sort of protective mode. Husband is off fighting to protect life, liberty, property. Wife is now going to make sure that that their family survives. I'm going to take the children with me, take, our belongings, let the cows loose so that if the British burn the barn, we won't lose the herd of cattle. So there's so many different facets to this one day.
This is amazing. Just to I don't want to go on too much because we have other questions, but I don't think people understand the horror and imagine if you could, for today, if something like this happened, it would be, for example, the United States Army going up against our National Guard. And the horror, and what's going to happen? Who do you choose? What do you do? Where are your allegiances? And you certainly don't want to get caught in the crossfire. It's really quite it's a huge event.
And very quickly, the panic worked on the other side too, because as you said, within a week, 20,000 colonists surrounded Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And the Loyalists, the 4,000 or so Loyalists in Boston, were terrified that they were going to come in and scalp them all.
Right. These are the people who scalp people. Right.
They thought
exactly.
they would be starved to death and then murdered in their beds.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So anyway, okay, you're right. We do have a few more questions to get to, and we are running to the end of our evening together. So let's get a couple more in. We had somebody else with her hand raised. Now, has she disappeared?
I think somebody did. Yes, they were. I think they
you left us. Do you want to come back and raise your hand again? We were going to call on you.
Or maybe we answered it.
Possibly.
Linda, we do have a new raised hand from Tom Crutcher.
Oh, Tom Crutcher. All right. Well, I tell you what, we're going to ask Tom to wait because we already answered one of his questions. I want to go back because we have a couple more who were in the pipeline before Tom. Tom, be patient. We'll get to you, okay? So Michelle Kane asks, this is a good one for Jim. Is there any account, do you have any research on British soldiers along the march, along the retreat back, asking or demanding, no, I'm sorry, they're not on the retreat back. They're heading to Concord. Do you have any account of soldiers demanding to return to Boston and not continue the mission to Concord?
I haven't read any of that. There is, in Ensign Lister's full account, he talks about after the fight at Lexington saying, we then learned our objective was Concord. So it sounds like, you're in a need to know basis. So Smith and Pitcairn know because they're leading the expedition. The enlisted men, they don't know where they're going. Even the junior officers are only getting the information as needed. Like, okay, we're heading on to Concord. So I haven't read of any refusals. In fact, Ensign Lister's account, there is one officer, a Lieutenant Hamilton, who was supposed to be with the light company of the 10th Regiment, who called in sick. And all of his colleagues were like, yeah, right, he's not sick. Yeah.
Right.
And so Ensign Lister saw that a company in his regiment was ready to go out on its first combat mission without its full complement of officers. So he wanted to go himself for the honor of the regiment. So there is one refusal from Hamilton, who feigned sickness. There was a minister, I keep forgetting his name. It's not Gordon, it's another one. Anyway, sees Percy's column coming out when they finally got their act together and are leaving Boston to go and save Smith's column. And by this point, these soldiers know they're going into a very, very bad situation. And he did mention seeing that a lot of the soldiers look very grim. Some of them are actually in tears as they're marching over Boston Neck. So they certainly, they're hesitant, but they're going. And then I think he had this wonderful quote, the band was playing Yankee Doodle as they marched out. And he said, we later made them dance to it. Ouch.
Right. And it's the esprit de corps that is one of the secrets of any army, but particularly the British Army. You march out, you do these things, no matter how harebrained they may seem at the time, but you do it for the people to your left and your right. You do it for the corps. You do it for your regiment. Okay, I hope that helps.
We just have a very short kudo I'd like to read out. Jones says, great format. Wonderful idea to have these actual depositions read and organized into a story. So I thought you'd like to know that.
Jim did all the work.
And
our volunteers did all the work. Are amazing.
Now, Tom Crutcher has written a question, which I'm going to read, and then we're going to call on him, because who knows, that may be the very question he wishes to ask. And we're going to make him the last question of the evening, because we're just about running out of time. So Tom's written question is, I wrote down Ensign Lister, wanting to look him up, but I didn't put any more information down. What was he connected with, please? So my request to you is, Jim, maybe in the chat line, you could give a little bit more information about Ensign Lister that a researcher could look up or something, if you wish.
Yeah, well, I can put his full name. That's one.
Yeah, all right. And we're going to unmute you, Tom. So if you'd like to speak, please go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah, his first name was Jeremy.
Are you there, Tom?
Oh, maybe
Can you
not.
hear me now?
Oh, yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it was about Ensign Lister. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that my written question was transmitted. I had written down earlier on Ensign Lister as something that I believe I wanted to look him up, but then I didn't put any more down because I didn't want to lose track of what everybody was talking about, and I wasn't sure if I got the name right. And then Mr. Hollister just re-mentioned him, so I think I heard correctly. Yeah, and I was wondering if there's did he publish, or were there any of his memoirs or his diary published?
Paul, do you want to?
Yes, there is. If you look up, I think it's called The Concord Fight, and it was many years later. He actually apparently had his elbow set so that he could write, because it was his right elbow. But he wrote this account many, many years later, and it was published. It was found at Shibden Hall, which was the ancestral home, and published by Harvard University in the early part of the 20th century, I believe. And it's called The Concord Fight. And you can go on Google Books or Amazon and find it. And it's an account of the Battle of Lexington and Concord by Jeremy Lister. He was an ensign in the 10th Regiment of Foot at the time. He, of course, had to leave the army at some point because of his wound. And interestingly, he goes on to father, I think it's Jane Lister, I think it is, who actually was the subject of a a mini series recently called Gentleman Jack, and so she was a writer and quite a person of her on her own. So these people don't just fade back into history. So there's quite a bit out there you can certainly find that book. And In the Family, Distant Relative, later on in the accounts, Jeremy talks about how they had to keep the infection out of his arm to try to save the arm. The doctors kept coming by saying, no, got to take it off. And he was like, no. And he kept draining it and all of that sort of thing. Later on in the 19th century, a distant relative, Joseph Lister,
Listerine,
right, figures out why his shoulder was getting infected. And when a group of toiletry manufacturers in London want a name for their stuff, they tap Joseph Lister to create the body, toothpastes and mouthwashes called Listerine. So it's amazing how that, these things were all interconnected.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. And that's a perfect way to end this great evening. Thank you so much to both of you for giving us an evening of education and entertainment and pleasure and going back in time. We knew this was going to be a great program, and you did not disappoint. I could go on and on, but I am now going to turn the program back over to June Baer, the chair of the committee, just to say good night and some final remarks. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. June, over to you.
Thank you, Linda. And I again want to just thank Jim and Paul. It's been a fascinating talk. And I know listening to all the comments that I'm just expressing how interesting it was just to hear both sides. And it really does bring that day to life. Again, I just want to thank everyone for coming and listening to this. It's been a great program. I want to also just let people know we are the Town Celebrations Committee. We do have some events coming up for Patriots Day. So please check out our website, patriotsday.com. A couple of things that you may be interested in. I know on Saturday, the Lexington chapter of the DAR and the Lexington Minutemen are having a Zoom webinar, and they do have Alexander Kane on to discuss that whole what the families felt as they were evacuating, as the troops were coming through. So that last little bit where Paul and Jim were talking, there you can hear a little bit more on Saturday. And watch Lex Media on Monday, because we do have some great programs coming, including our own Lexington's Patriots Day on Parade, where you can watch our, we've created a parade for you to watch. So we do have a parade. So thank you, everybody. And happy Patriots Day.
All right. Thank you all. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And also a salute to our volunteers who supplied the talent for all of those accounts. Wouldn't have happened without them. And of course, Paul, as long as you don't talk like a pirate, everything works.
I would never do that.
Oh, no, of course. Thank you all.
Okay. Good night.